So all of us have artists that inspire us, people that we can say have just lit a fire under us and made us feel that looking at their art is something that we could do all day long. It's something that makes us want to go there. You know, if it's a landscape, I want to get lost in that. I want to visit that place, you know. If it's a floral, it could just be just the lusciousness, some of the colors. It speaks to something inside of us, and that's why we fall in love with different artists. And my three favorite artists throughout history are Georgia O'Keeffe, Vincent van Gogh, and Chiro Obata. And one of the exercises that I've done, I don't do it very often, but I really advocate for this, even though in the 60s we were told don't ever copy. Don't copy. Copy's a bad thing. Basically, I disagree with that to the extent that Georgia O'Keeffe is no longer here. I can't learn from her anymore, other than looking at her work and painting my interpretation of her work. Vincent van Gogh is clearly not here anymore. And nor did he teach anyone directly that we know of and pass it down. And neither is Chiro Obata. And so these are people that if I want to learn from them, I'm going to have to, at some point, venture into trying to make painting their art part of my journey, just so I can get into their head a little bit and take that inspiration just a step higher. And so that's kind of what I've done. I wanted to show you that. Here's one of Georgia O'Keeffe's books. It doesn't have this painting in it, but this was done as an inspiration. It's something I painted. She did this iris in oil, and it was one that I had in one of my offices a long, long time ago. Just because the colors speak to me, the subtle shading and shapes really speak to me, and her interpretation of this flower just really resonated with me, and it makes me feel calm. It makes me feel at peace. It makes me feel like there's someone out there that gets how beautiful the world is as much, if not more, than I do, and that means a lot to me. And so that's where, you know, I imitated her so I could learn. Now, the interesting thing is this is a watercolor, and the original in this is an oil. And so that's definitely a learning curve to make a watercolor look like an oil. And that's something that I will be teaching, smooth shading and glazing in watercolor. So I'll have some of those classes coming up. This is as close as I could get to looking similar to the iris in her book. So I just wanted to show you, you know, just she really was about shape, value, line and design, and making things appear very peaceful and controlled, but in an out of control kind of manner, which is amazing. I love her work. So Georgia O'Keeffe. You could debate, right? Which way? And then Van Gogh, he again was an oil painter, just like O'Keeffe was. And I decided to choose something very simple of his. And I did this one in oil, but let me show you his original. So here's the original. And I love just the asymmetry, the almost Japanese-esque aspect, some of the outlining, which is something that is taught out of us and squeezed out of us in art schools and classes. And he brought it back in, and the reason why is the Impressionists didn't outline, and they had come from Da Vinci on. Basically outlining was verboten, and he brought it back in because part of what was happening is the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, many of them loved Japanese art, and they would order a China tea set or something like that from China or Japan. And typically in Japan, the way they box them and they send them, they're wrapped up in what we would call almost gift wrap paper that's been painted on. And a lot of artists over there, if you're in Japan, you don't get, and I'll get into that in a minute with Chiro Obata, you don't get to call yourself an artist or a painter, and really to say you're an artist in that culture is considered arrogant. So you'd call yourself a painter. But that they don't get to sign their own work in Japan until they've painted 1,000 paintings. So I think some of the packaging honestly came from art schools. And so Van Gogh and Monet, people like that, were getting bits and pieces of this art just crumpled up in packaging, and they would iron it and frame it and put it in their studios, or just somehow fix it to the wall in their studios. And both you would find in Monet's dining room, he only had Japanese art hanging, and in Van Gogh's studio, typically that was all he had hanging, which is really interesting. And I think it influenced their work. So especially Van Gogh, we know it did. But this is my interpretation of that painting. And so essentially, I'm trying to get into his head when I'm trying to paint this, and I'm trying to say, well, what was he feeling with this kind of a stroke, or by combining those colors, what emotions might he have been feeling, and also technique. By doing this, I get a feel for his brush strokes, his technique, things like that. So that's very, very valuable, I felt. I love me some Van Gogh. And no jokes about the missing ear. Okay. Now, Chiro Obata, he is my favorite watercolor. I just lost the spot. He's my favorite watercolorist. Should be easy to find. And he essentially did amazing work in watercolor. He came over from Japan. He escaped, in a sense. During World War II, his brother was he was in Japan. And he was high up in the Japanese army, from what I understand, and he knew that his artistic younger brother wasn't going to do well as a soldier, and so he put him on a boat and shipped him off, and he was a stowaway, and he came into the harbor of San Francisco, and he had heard about Yosemite, and he made his way, a little bit like John Muir did, he made his way to Yosemite as quickly as he could. And his brother would send him paint supplies. So if he ran out of colors, the interesting thing is he made his paint supplies from actual minerals. So if he ran out of green, his brother would send him a little tiny vial of emeralds. If he ran out of sapphire, his brother would send him a little tiny vial of sapphire, the blues. If he ran out of reds, he would get a little vial of rubies. And back during World War II, one of those vials ran about $700. And then he would ship it, and Obata would pick it up. He would crush the gems, and then he would add, it could have been honey at the time, different types of vehicles. Gum arabic is what we use now. Perhaps they were using that at that time. But that was an interesting little tidbit about his colors. Now, when you see this one, you're going to see what draws me to him so strongly. The color is amazing. And of course, this is the High Sierra. This is country I'm very well versed in. I hike back there. I've done hundreds and hundreds of miles in the Sierra with backpacking and hiking. And so when I saw this painting, I fell head over heels in love and had to, you guessed it, paint it. And I have a poster of it framed and looking like it's a print in my bathroom. But this here is my version of that painting. And so by doing this, it just helped me connect with Obata and Obata's body of work. And it made me feel like, okay, maybe I'm not painting with emeralds and sapphire, but I have a feel for what he's doing with color, shape, line design, composition. It gets me into his head. And because I can't learn from him directly, I can't learn from Van Gogh directly, I can't learn from Georgia O'Keeffe directly, I take these artists that I am in love with, and I try to imitate their work just to see what I can learn from them. What can I glean from their mastery? What can I glean from the things that feed my soul in their work? And so that's what I'd like to suggest, that everyone who's on their art journey do this at one time or another. Do it with either your all-time favorite artists, or with, you know, one or two or three of them. I've really only done these three artists, to be quite honest. I don't copy other people's work hardly ever, but when I do, I only do it as a way of creating something that I can that gets me closer to them and I can learn from. When I do it, I would A, never sell the work, and B, I sign it my name via the artist. So D. Loren, which is Dana Loren is my main name, my middle name is Loren. D. Loren via Obata. And so you will find on all of these paintings that I have signed it with their name first, because it is their composition.